I call to order the meeting of the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee. It is Wednesday, January 29th, 2025 at 3:30 p.m. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Valmer. Alderwoman Keys.
Here.
Alderwoman Velazquez. Vice Chair Browning.
Present.
Chair Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderman Balmer. Alderwoman Velazquez. We have 3 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. A quorum being present, I will move to the approval of the minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 11th, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th to approve the minutes. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Balmer. Alderwoman Keys.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velazquez. Vice Chair Browning.
Aye.
Chair Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderman Balmer. We have 4 aye votes.
By your vote, you have sustained the motion from the Alderwoman from the 11th and approved the minutes of Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. Today during committee, we don't have any board bills for review or resolutions, but we do have an update on the Transportation and Mobility Plan, which has been an exciting effort across the city. Many of you may have seen the public hearings or gone to one, or the surveys, or many of the other ways that they've been involved in the community. So today we have Jackie Knight and Scott Ogilvie here to present on the St. Louis Transportation and Mobility Plan as to where it is now. If both of you could please approach and give your presentations, we look forward to hearing it. You'll just want to make sure the microphone is on and that you say your full name before giving testimony. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, press the little button.
Gotta be green. How about now? Well, hello, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Scott Ogilvie. I work in the Planning and Urban Design Agency for the City of St. Louis. Position is called Program Manager for Complete Streets, and I am here today representing the Transportation and Mobility planning effort, and here to give the committee and the public an update on the plan. With me, Jackie Knight, which I will more fully introduce in a moment, who on the consultant side is a project manager. Some of the things I'm going to say in the introduction, I know you folks already know, but for the public, I will say them again. So the first thing I like to say when discussing this planning effort, and the reason to me why this is such an important project, is that we don't currently have a transportation plan for the city of St. Louis. And of course, this is very unusual for just about any city in 2025. Transportation and mobility infrastructure, our streets, sidewalks, bridges, trails, services, safe and accessible mobility, these are really some of the core responsibilities of local government. And of course, we're engaged in all those things today, but generally speaking, not within the framework of an overall transportation plan. A transportation plan is really a fundamental aspect of a city's comprehensive plan. We began this planning work in the spring of last year, and the most visible element of that planning work so far has been the public engagement and survey work across the city that we've done, where we've reached over 2,000 residents in one form or another. But less visible is the engagement with city staff and partner agencies that has also been underway, and the work in the background to translate that input into a plan that expresses the values and desires of residents, informed by the real-world experience of city staff. We are about halfway through this planning process. We are past the initial round of citywide public engagement. We are in the middle of plan development. So I want to introduce you to the project manager on the consultant team, Jackie Knight. Jackie works for Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley, which is the prime consultant on this project. Her office is based in downtown St. Louis. Also on the project team, each with their own area of focus, are Smith Group, SWT, Vector Communications, Civil Design Inc., CDI, Crawford, Blunty & Braemeier, CBB, and PGAV. On the city side, This project is a collaborative effort between the office I work in, Planning and Urban Design, as well as the Board of Public Service, the Streets Department, the Office of the Disabled, and the Office of the Mayor. Jackie is going to discuss what we've done so far and also provide an overview of some key plan elements that are now in development. So without further ado.
Good afternoon. My name's Jackie Knight. As Scott said, I'm the project manager for the TMP. Thank you for having me here today. Really excited to give an update on the project. As Scott mentioned, Crawford Murphy and Tilley's office is in downtown St. Louis, but whenever I'm sharing about the project, I also like to let people know that I'm a resident of the city of St. Louis as well. So this project is very important to me personally. So today we're going to share information on what we've accomplished so far. We're going to give information on plan elements, and as Scott mentioned, this maybe hasn't been as visible to the public, so we're really going to share where we are in the process there. Specifically, we're going to focus on the safety action plan, the street design framework, and then our policy and ordinance review. And I'll finish out the presentation with a preview of the remaining schedule for 2025. So just to let everybody know where we are in the process, to date, we have completed our initial public engagement and survey. Those results have been compiled, and there is a fact sheet available on the project website, and I also brought printed copies with me today that I can leave behind, and we'll also go through it in the presentation. And we're in the process of using those results in the plan development. So kind of where we are right now is all plan elements are in development. Scott said we're about 50% through the project, so we're really shooting to get to that draft form. And then in the future, coming up this spring, we'll be doing public engagement on the draft plan element of the full plan, and that'll be in spring and early summer 2025. So today, we're going to talk about the public engagement and the survey responses. I'll give information on the safety action plan. We'll talk about where we are in the street design framework and exactly what the street design framework is. And then we're also going to finish with information on the policy and ordinance review that we are working through as a part of the TMP as well. Okay, so what have we accomplished? Go to the next slide. So since July, on the public engagement front, over 1,500 total survey results. Vector Communications used a research firm to administer a statistically significant survey, and we also had a community-wide survey available on our website. The purpose of doing this is that we wanted to make sure that we were capturing voices very representative of the city of St. Louis. With a community survey, there could be some response bias. You might lean more towards people who are more invested in the topic, and we truly wanted to hear from everybody living in the city about their experience traveling around St. Louis. We had an interactive map online where people could leave information about their walking and biking experience in the city. We had over 200 comments on that. We held 4 open houses with over 90 participants at geographically diverse areas in the city. We gave 9 presentations on the project to various organizations that meet regularly who would be interested in the TMP. And then we attended 23 pop-ups and events. So these would be neighborhood festivals or community events, pop-ups at the Orthwein Center, for example, to try to also make sure that we're focusing on some specific audiences like disabled populations that we really wanted to make sure those voices and that input was captured. So the survey breakdown of community participants versus the statistically significant survey. In the community survey, we had a little over 1,200 participants. 81% of those community survey respondents do live in St. Louis, representing 43 zip codes. The statistically significant survey was completed by 327 people, all City of St. Louis residents, and that's a 90% confidence level. So again, we were able to compare the community survey with the statistically significant survey to really understand the mobility experience of people in the city. Next slide. Also, what hasn't been as visible, as Scott mentioned, is all of the work that we've been doing with staff and stakeholders. One of the kickoff events that we did to this project was a values workshop. We did a values workshop with city staff and with partner agencies. This was a really important kind of tone-setting event for the project so that we're really thinking about our values around infrastructure and how are we making that we're making when it comes to infrastructure. We kept city staff separate from stakeholders, recognizing there's multiple departments in the city, and then also stakeholders that have some sort of ownership or maintenance on infrastructure and transportation facilities like MoDOT, Metro, Great Rivers Greenway, East West Gateway, organizations like that. David Newberger is also on the core team for the project, and so he has kept us very engaged with the Universal Design Group. We've actually met with that group 3 different times. We will be continuing to meet with them. But again, oftentimes people living with disabilities, their voices are left out of these conversations. It's very challenging to get to public meetings or community events. And so we're being just really intentional about that outreach to make sure that we can include it in our process. We also established a community advisory committee. We've met with the community advisory committee twice now. The community advisory committee was established. People applied to be on the committee online. It was essentially a random lottery, but there were some screening questions, again, because we make sure that the advisory committee is made up of people that are walking, regularly for transportation or using public transit, biking, things like that. We also held a safety action plan workshop with city staff. This was a really exciting workshop because we were able to share information on the East West Gateway to Safer Roadways Regional Safety Action Plan. The safety data that the city has now as a result of that plan is just so much better safety data than we've ever had before. So being able to share with city staff that we can start using that information, and then how are we building on it in the TMP. We also held a policy and ordinance workshop with city staff. This was after we held a series of departmental interviews with staff from various departments, hearing directly from those responsible for project delivery in the city about various policies or ordinances that might be impacting project programming, project delivery, things that we should be considering. And we use the information we found there to host this workshop about what we've done and where we plan to go. And then we're also really into the street design framework. There's been several iterations. We're in a pretty good shape right now. But one thing that we did there is we did a series of neighborhood walking tours with members of the core team and other stakeholder agencies, where we actually went out in the field and went to 3 different neighborhoods, totaled about 9 miles a day, where we could really field check what was going on and start thinking a little bit differently about transportation planning and roadway design, and how does adjacent land use context play into the way that we're designing our streets. So a lot's been going on there. Next slide. Just some pictures that we would include in the presentation so you could see the open houses. These are some examples of our open houses. It was station-based. We had some really good participation there. You can see we even had an opportunity for children to give input about how they like to travel around the city. We felt that was really important as the future of St. Louis. And on the next slide, just some examples from our community events. So you can see where we were tabling in neighborhoods, truly meeting people where they were, and getting very similar feedback that we got at our open house. So the values workshop that we held with city staff and stakeholder agencies is also a question that we asked on our survey at our open houses. And you can see these are the public responses from our community survey, our statistically significant survey, and our open house survey results. Safety is always coming in by far number 1, so that will be an important theme of the TMP. Maintenance and quality was in the top 3 on both the community survey and the statistically significant survey. So how are we keeping up with our streets? How are we maintaining our sidewalks? How, this is a really important part of how people get around. And then equity and accessibility connections were rounding out the top 3 from the open houses. So when we compare that to the street design values from our stakeholder meeting, city staff and partner agency both had safety. That was number 1 at both of those workshops. Equity was number 2, and then some difference there on the number 3 with mobility on the city staff workshop and accessibility on the partner agency workshop. And just for reference, there was about 12 values that as small groups at these workshops, tables had to come to a consensus of their top 3. So we have taken that and we have summarized the top 3 themes for the TMP. Safety, which means prioritizing the safety of all transportation users, including pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, and drivers. But really thinking about this, that, if the goal is safety, if the value is safety, how are the decisions that we are making aligning with a truly safe transportation system? Connectivity is another theme that came across through healthy neighborhoods, through accessibility connectivity, but then also through equity. So thinking about how people throughout every area of the city are able to get around. And so what that means is enhancing seamless multimodal connections within neighborhoods and across the city. And then finally, maintenance and quality is going to round out the 3 themes that will be across the entire TMP. And that means that we're ensuring long-term infrastructure resilience, reliability, state of good repair, and aesthetic appeal. So that was the summary from all of the values that we heard at the workshops and the public engagement. So on the fact sheet right here, and you can see on the screen, I can leave these behind. This is just some numbers about the people that we reached and how we reached them. Pretty much everything that I went through in terms of how many people completed the survey, where people completed the survey, what those top values are, and then a little bit of information about the survey participants. On the next slide, I'll cover some more of this information in detail because I haven't talked about it yet. But we asked how people get around, and you can see 81% always or frequently drive, 45% are frequently walking, followed by 21% biking, and 17% using MetroLink or Metro Bus. The residents' insight component of this sheet, which is farther down on that light blue column, we found really insightful as we were working through these responses. 80% of respondents to the community-wide survey feel that the mobility needs of children are currently unmet in the city of St. Louis. Children, thinking about them and how they're experiencing the city, more vulnerable road users, how are we designing safe spaces for them? I think that really lines up with safety being a priority. Some other statistics on that sheet, 51% of respondents said they have been involved in a traffic crash. And actually 21% of respondents said that they have had a loved one suffer a life-altering injury or actually die as a result of a traffic crash. A little ahead. Yeah, sorry. No, it's still on this. Okay, thanks. So when we think about safety, certainly this is driving how people are responding, but 20%, a little over 20%, having someone die or be seriously injured, that's a real impact to your life and to how you're thinking about getting. And then 50% do not feel comfortable navigating the city using their preferred transportation method. I also want to draw your attention to kind of the speedometer in the middle of the page. We also asked people if they would be willing to experience slower travel speeds if it meant that overall reckless driving decreased. and 90% of respondents agreed that they would be willing to experience slower travel speed. Similar question, if you would experience slower travel speeds, if it meant that more people who don't have access to own or operate a car could travel more easily. 91% of respondents agreed that yes, they would be. I think these are really important details for the city moving forward. A lot of times when we go ask the public how they feel about projects or infrastructure solutions, we're asking very specific questions to very specific corridors or neighborhoods, and that really could be impacting how people are responding. So when we step back, kind of like stepping back and thinking about goals, these, I think, are going to be really important data points moving forward and making decisions that are based on safety, again, as that critical theme for transportation moving forward. And then at the top, there's the top 5 responses about what's working well. And those would be supporting and implementing bike infrastructure, supporting an existing future Metrolink, supporting public transit, traveling by car, and supporting traffic calming. And then what could be improved is reckless driving, street and sidewalk maintenance. Again, those really line up with the top 2 values. Dedicated bike lanes and trails, construction impacts on streets, and connecting sidewalks. So I can leave this sec here and hand it out. It's also available on our website. So now if we want to go to the next slide, we'll move into the draft plan elements. So the first plan element I want to talk about is our safety action plan. The wheel on the screen is the safe systems approach, that basically the principles on the outer wheel and the outcomes on the inner part of the wheel really boil down to this idea that we're all humans, we all make mistakes, we need to build safety redundancy into our transportation system to try to make sure those mistakes are not deadly or life-altering. East West Gateway did complete their regional safety action plan this past summer. And so we are building on the work that was done by East West Gateway. It's really important to note that that East West Gateway plan is a regional plan. It's for 8 counties. And so there is just some stuff that couldn't happen in that scale of a plan that we can really dig into in the city safety action plan. And some of those things are defining what systemic safety approaches look like for St. Louis, how we're aligning policy solutions to support the safety plan implementation. Also, how are we tracking investments that we're making in projects on our high injury network and also those outcomes. So what's working and maybe what's not. And then also the goal setting for safer streets. So what is the crash reduction we're trying to get to by a certain year? So a little bit about our crash analysis methodology. That, like I said, we're building off East West Gateway's plan. I'm going to go through 2 examples on the next slide. It's actually 1 example, 2 pages, a little bit about what the output is. But a few things I wanted to point out on this slide is that we're doing this for a lot of locations in the city of St. Louis. This is really important to really dig into safety issues on our streets and understand what's going on. We're actually reviewing crash reports and really trying to understand what's happening at specific locations. We're also reviewing proposed improvements. There's a lot of programmed projects right now and trying to understand crash reduction that's going to be associated with those improvements, but then also where can the city build on those improvements in the future. And then that's the next step. So the methodology is, again, segmenting those corridors, identifying the hot spots, analyzing pretty much everything I just talked about, reviewing those improvements, and then next steps for potential implementation. So if you could go to the next slide, this is just an example of a draft appendix page for the safety action plan. This is Grand Avenue. As you know, there's several programmed improvements on Grand Avenue. There's some information about the corridor profile and the safety assessment, charts on roadway fatalities and serious injuries by year, and then even the crash types by segment. So then you can see at the map where the numbers are. We've basically segmented that portion of Grand into 14 hotspots for analysis. And on the next slide, you can see we've reviewed planned improvements, some more information about the specific crashes and the exact location these crashes are occurring, and then recommendations for future improvements. So again, we've got a lot of data points in the city, a lot of locations that we're doing this for, but this is the next step, building off of East-West Gateway so that we can really dig into the details of roadway safety on city streets. So then the other plan element that we wanted to cover today is our Street Design Framework 101. This is a new way of thinking about street design in St. Louis, but this is not new to other large cities. A lot of cities have been moving this way. And what is the Street Design Framework? It's going to be a vision, a map, and a set of tools that describe how each street in St. Louis can be designed, prioritized, and then realized. So designed to meet the mobility needs of all people, regardless of transportation mode. How are we prioritizing improvements for safety, access, comfort? Again, thinking about those values. And then also, how are we thinking about design elements in the public right-of-way that better support adjacent land uses, including residents, businesses, neighbors, and parks? And if you want to go to the next slide, just a little bit about what I'm talking about when I say this is a new way of doing it in St. Louis, but it's not new across the United States. On this graphic up here, you can see the then approach is what's known as centerline out. That relies heavily on roadway functional classification that is largely focused on vehicular efficiency and movement throughout a transportation system. Really only accounts for what's in the curb to curb and how our feet feeding into a larger system. Versus now, it's really a building in approach that's more holistic, it's more context sensitive, and it really gets at the question of who are we designing these streets for. When we're designing streets focused largely on roadway functional classification, we are really designing those streets for people to move through places. When we're looking at designing streets from a building in way, we're really thinking about the people that live there and how people are experiencing that place. So that's what the Street Design Framework is. So again, the vision is how do we want our streets to look and feel? How can we better protect vulnerable road users? Those are people traveling outside of a car, elderly populations, disabled, children. People that have, a greater chance of dying or be seriously injured if hit by a car, but also managing safety for all travelers, providing design guidance in many situations. These are not engineering design standards, though. These are just typical guidance that can help scope out a project. And then also checklists for how we're prioritizing infrastructure improvements and how are we making some of those tough decisions when it comes to trade-offs in a potentially constrained public right-of-way. Next slide. So the Street Design Framework will also come with a map of street types. This is just a snip of one iteration of a working map that considers current and future land use patterns, and also street design conditions such as design speed, traffic volumes, road widths, and street amenities. And then it's also a set of tools for decision making. So imageries of these typical sections, if you will, checklists, procedures, written guidelines of desirable street elements. So all of this comes together in an example matrix like this, where you can see on one side, we've got our proposed definition names, and on the top, we have our proposed design characteristics. Again, this is still in draft form. I don't expect you to be able to read all of that on there, but you can see how the different design elements come into play with the various street types. And then finally, our draft matrix to date that takes into account roadway needs on the side with land use context on the top. And then these definitions will be accompanied with the materials that we just walked through that will better help the city prioritize projects and define what projects are on certain street types. I should mention the map that this will be accompanied with. Our team is actually out in the field investigating every street in the city of St. Louis to make sure that we're really capturing that context and that we're getting that naming definition right. But this is not to say that street types cannot change. They certainly can, especially in future planning projects such as the Neighborhood Planning Initiative. So just some examples here. We have some neighborhood main streets. The images are of Mackland Avenue and North 14th Street. And you see what the images look like now, what the priorities are, how they have a location on the map, and then the key characteristics of that street type. In the next slide, some example of district main streets where we have Washington Avenue and Grand Boulevard. Again, in gray, what are the goals of that street, the map that accompanies, and then the key characteristics. So then finally, we're in the process of our policy and ordinance review right now. We did a series of departmental interviews, also took input from the public survey in our steering committee, and we organized our policy review into categories that we're investigating. So the first big bucket category is capital budgeting, planning, program, project selection, and services. The next category is traffic safety, traffic calming, and enforcement. The next category is development and private construction, followed by asset management and data sharing, and then also a community engagement process, which would be inclusive of public project maps and how we're sharing information with the public. So at that workshop that we had in the just a couple months ago, we shared some benchmarks. We've actually been researching benchmark policy solutions from other communities, and we got feedback from city staff on those. So now we're in the process of reviewing that feedback and then also layering in staffing capacity, which is a key component of this part of the process. And then finally, we have the timeline. So the safety action plan is kind of leading everything. We're submitting a draft in February. The draft street design framework will be ready in March. We'll do some community engagement starting in April with open houses in May, followed by the draft policy revisions and recommendations. The draft planning document will be complete in June, and then plan adoption will occur in August. So a lot of information, but thank you for having me to share information on the project, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation and for all you've done. I know it's an incredible amount of work so far. I'll move for questions. Alderman Vollmer.
No questions. Thank you very much. It's a very, very comprehensive overview. Thank you very much.
Alderwoman Keys. We'll come back to Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Velasquez?
I have no questions, just being here and for a thorough presentation. I'm probably going to come over it and probably more, yes, look at it more in detail, but thank you.
Vice Chair Browning.
Thank you for that presentation. I really appreciate it. Just a couple questions. So the ordinance review that you are doing as part of the plan, is the idea that there's going to be recommendations that come to the board of ordinances that we should then pass that would be helpful in implementing this plan?
I think in general, the answer to that question is yes. I don't think we're going to be like writing draft ordinances as part of the plan, but I think we're going to be defining goals and defining policies that maybe today aren't supportive of those goals, and making recommendations on policies that would be more supportive of the outcomes that are identified and adopted within the plan. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. What I want to make sure we're not doing is waiting on like a recommendation of like we should create a paving plan because it's like obvious that we should. But I'm wondering just like is there going to be more detail involved in that so that we can create perhaps like best practices and how other cities have implemented that?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is yes. I mean, I do think there's going to be recommendations in the plan that are specific to the St. Louis context and that are specific to current practices. And I think there'll be specific recommendations on programs or practices that should be updated so that they, meet the goals that are identified in the plan. Because this is a planning process, generally, of course, the plan itself is not doing the implementation, but I do think there will be clear recommendations that will be based on a lot of input from city staff who, many of whom have been very engaged with this and have really helped us identify places that our current practice maybe doesn't meet today's needs. So I think there'll be strong recommendations for policy change in the document. Yes. Excellent.
Thank you so much. That's a helpful answer. And last question I have, which is at the top of a lot of people's minds right now. By chance, are you all looking at snow removal on streets and sidewalks, knowing that it's a big part of transportation, especially in the winter?
Not directly. So I think there are some of those operational elements that are harder to address in a planning document. I think certainly, the way a city maintains its right-of-way has significant impacts for people's ability to move around, especially for accessibility. And so those elements cannot be, they can't be ignored in a planning process. I think they are probably I think they're better expressed probably in the values in the plan for accessibility, which tended to rank very highly across many groups of people who we asked. But operationalizing those things is, it just doesn't always connect if you put it in a plan. I mean, we have many plans that say like city or agencies should do X, Y, or Z. And it's fine to say that, but I think maybe just highlighting the goals is better, and then, kind of circulating that goal and letting departments figure out the best way to meet those goals in the future.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your work on this and great presentation. I also just want to shout out, I really appreciate the statistically significant survey option because the survey is kind of a measure, but doing it well is another thing. And I really appreciate how you all went about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Browning, for those questions. He asked one of the questions that I had written down that I think is so important. One of the things we deal with in the city of St. Louis is enforcement of the policies that are already on the books. And that I am, worried about with the utility bill that we just passed in the city and the mayor signed, which indicates a willingness to, put it into practice. That's the job from there, Yet making sure that actually happens, that commitment, that piece is not something that we can build out in a plan. And I'm very interested in the comments that you had with the city staff, city workers, if that was discussed at all in terms of if that came up.
Yeah, and so some of these things, I think the policy and ordinance review, that section is engaging with some of these topics. I mean, there are operational topics that review is engaging with, certainly. And I guess the way I would maybe frame it today is that because we don't have a plan, we don't have a document anywhere that says, we should build this amount of sidewalks, or we should ensure that, the city is becoming more accessible every year, or we should have a goal for a state of good repair, or pave this many miles of streets a year, right? Those are not goals that we have established for ourselves. So I think we have kind of some legacy policies that are not directed towards certain outcomes. And so if we're going to be setting some goals or values in the plan, and so if a value is like, prioritize accessibility, I think that then becomes a reference point for things like, utility work, and maintenance, right? It helps support, we'd say the city has adopted this policy of accessibility, this goal of accessibility. The policies we have in many areas need to support that goal. And so that's, that's budgeting a sufficient amount of money to create accessible sidewalks. It's a policy that is robust enough to deal with utility work so that, things are being put back in an accessible way. All of those things that we hope will lead to better outcomes. But those goals today are just not, specifically defined anywhere. And so I think sometimes that leads us to not have the strongest policies to support them.
I would push back a little bit on that just because I think that there are a lot of laws in the city of St. Louis that address things, standards that are just not enforced. And so there's the, big P policy, thinking about the ordinances and the legislation that we pass here at the board. And then there's the small P policy, how that actually happens within the department. And I feel like we have a Vision Zero plan. We passed a new complete streets policy, passed a utility ordinance. And we can have all the big P policies we want, but if the policies within the department are not complying with that or prioritizing that, that's the piece that I don't know how to fix within a plan or a policy update in that way. And so, I get saying that we need to have these goals in place. And I hope that happens within the departments, that we focus on the enforcement of things and actually doing the policies we have in place, because I do think there are some in place. The other thing I wanted to ask about, we've had kind of a whirlwind day here with federal funding available to the projects that we all care so much about. I know I have numerous projects that will, and across the city, of course, that will rely on federal funding either now or in the future to take place. Is this something that is discussed at all in the planning process in terms of infrastructure that we can afford and how that plays out in a city that might not have support for 4 years from the federal government?
Yeah, I think we're going to be looking at what a sufficient level of investment is to, maintain and improve the system we have on an annual basis. The funding infrastructure for a long time, for at least 75 years, has been a shared responsibility of local government, state government, federal government. Most of the federal transportation spending is through things like the gas tax that everybody pays, right? So there's the expectation that citizens across this country, they pay taxes, it goes to the federal government, and there's a system for dispersing that money back to the states. The details of that change every few years, how that dispersion happens. But I don't have any special insight into this, but I would be surprised if, the federal government doesn't continue to participate in infrastructure and transportation projects. That would be a radical departure from current practice, and it would be, it would impact every part of the country, right? There are
that is
hundreds of thousands of jobs, and
right.
there are, hundreds of millions of people who are expecting the federal government to be participating in the infrastructure needs of the country. So obviously there's some big question marks on that today, but it would be shocking if the federal government completely pulled back from that response.
I think I've lost my ability to be shocked by anything that this administration does. Now I'm just expecting it and planning for it, because that's what our job is here in the city of St. Louis, is to make sure that city services are delivered, city streets are paved, potholes are filled, and we enforce the policies that are on the books. So no matter what happens, we have that basic responsibility. Okay, well, I appreciate this presentation, and just personally to Ms. Knight, I really appreciate all the advocacy that you bring to the city of St. Louis and the conversations we've had around this plan and through everything else that you do. It is just very appreciated, and I'm so glad that you're here working on this. So thank you. So I believe we probably have some public comment.
We have none.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, Mr. Ogilvy, Ms. Knight, thank you so much for being here. As always, you are so informative. We need you in the city of St. Louis, so thank you for all you do.
I want to extend my thanks to Jackie as well for her work on the project so far and her whole team. So thank you for the invitation today, and I'm sure we'll be back before the plan is complete if you invite us. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you for everyone participating in that. That was a very interesting presentation. Make sure to share that video on your social media as well so people can see it. Acknowledgement of any written testimony.
We have none.
Thank you. Announcements. I have asked the administration to come and speak on the enforcement efforts around the utility bill next Wednesday. I have not heard a confirmation from them yet on that, so still waiting on that, and hopefully we'll have the ability to let people know an update on that soon. Any other announcements? All members were present today. Well done. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
It's been moved by the alderwoman from the 6th, seconded by the alderman from the 5th. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned.